Silence! Silence!
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me.
No different. Only different in your mind. There is no time now for grief. You must act there or get there.
It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
Luminous means so not this crude matter. Life is choice. You can choose to be a victim or anything else you'd like to be.
Well, how would we start?
There is no starting or stopping. Only doing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Curiosus Animus podcast. I'm your host, Scott White, and today I've got with me a career firefighter by the name of John Taylor. This gentleman has turned me on to some interesting situations in California, and he is, while I have just like an OSHA 30 card that's probably expired by now, he's well more versed on the things that have been going on, specifically in East Palestine, Ohio, and that complete catastrophic failure of Overwatch. So
Absolutely.
let's explore. Which do you want to explore first? Do you want to talk about California?
Well, yeah, I'd probably. Yeah, well, let's. Palestine's more recent, and I really have more expertise in that. Well, first of all, I got in the fire service in 1987. I was a paramedic on the rescue truck and got promoted to company officer, which is a lieutenant in Florida. And I spent probably about 2/3 of my career on a ladder truck. Also, functioning as a paramedic. At that point, I went to the National Fire Academy, was certified as a hazardous materials technician, and also a tox medic, which is a pretty intensive course that they have for anybody that's a paramedic that would be treating any sort of hazardous materials type incident. So also a company officer, and for the last 10 years I also functioned as a acting battalion chief for the department, which was a very good experience. And it's about 30 years between EMS and the fire service. So but yeah, hazmat at the National Fire Academy was a really intensive course, and you get like lifetime support after you go there as far as continuing education. So that a little more comfortable with the hazmat. Then we've fought a lot of brush fires, but nothing like California. But yeah, the East Palestine thing was one of the strangest scenarios that I've ever seen, as far as mitigating a hazardous materials incident. They actually did nothing and just allowed that to blow up. But I don't know if they actually placed explosives to make that happen, which would be so far out of this world that I can't even imagine that. But doing nothing to those materials, and I got the consist for the train, and they were dealing with some really bad stuff. But what was never mentioned either, there was benzene that was on that consist, and I'm not sure exactly what car that was in, if that car was involved. But there's something called, it's an NFIRS report. It's a National Fire Incident Reporting System that every incident that you go on, whether it's hazardous materials or a structure fire or whatever, the primary responder is responsible for filling that out. And it's a very comprehensive report. I think it'll probably take them months to complete because of what was involved. But,
moving at the speed of government at the minimum, right? So
yeah,
so for those who don't know, benzene is incredibly toxic to the human system. It is, from what I understand, I just recently learned some stuff about it. Actually, it's interesting that it's coming up. The accepted exposure limits is something like 0.05 parts per million, right? And anything above
very,
that, like,
very, very little.
yeah, like
Yeah.
a whiff, that's it. You're probably overexposed.
Yeah,
That's
and in a situation like that, in hazardous materials response, there's two levels really that we operate on. One is level B, and you would be in a respirator type mask with not on bottled air, and Tyvek suit and gloves and boots, but anything dealing with benzene, you'd be full level A, which is a totally encapsulated suit. You're wearing a self-contained breathing apparatus. I mean, you're sealed tight, and all those chemicals that were on that scene. But what was weird to me too is that in all the reporting, they were reporting like 5 chemicals, and they didn't mention the benzene at all. They concentrated on, I think it was vinyl chloride, and there was 5 chemicals that, in all the news reporting, I read a lot of those articles, and that's what they concentrated on. And somebody got the the consist, which is the list on the train of the hazardous materials, and benzene was definitely on there along with another couple. But I was surprised to see that, and I was surprised to see that it wasn't reported.
that's well, being that the news media in general, right, the powers that be have essentially, ever since like Operation Mockingbird, going way back, have got a handle on things and what can be said and what can't be said. And when people go against the script, so often there's a connection issue, and they lose whoever they're talking to because it's just not fitting the bill. So
yeah, it's a conspiracy theory.
absolutely, it's death by coincidence. So scary.
And I thought I'd seen it all before this last 2 or 3 years, because I've been since 9/11. That pretty much woke me up, and when I saw 3 buildings that were controlled demolitions, right in front of my face, one that wasn't hit by a plane, collapsing of its own footprint, that kind of got me, researching a lot of stuff. And so, yeah, I've been pretty heavily into researching all this stuff that they tell us never happened. So.
It's so, to that point, when I was going to school at a community college where I was learning about welding, and I asked my welding instructor, I was like, so what do you think about those buildings falling down on their footprint? And he was definitely a not rock the boat kind of guy, and he said, well, structural steel loses its integrity at 500 degrees, and he just kind of left it at that, because he didn't respond to my pressing forward on, well, why would it collapse into its own footprint, at free fall speed? It doesn't make sense to me. And he said, well, go to another school and learn some more physics, I guess. I don't know. So, but the just 500 degrees being the blow off as far as the structural stuff, it doesn't explain building 7 and why that went down on its own.
No, and molten metal, because I knew a lot of the guys that were there. We brought them down to Florida. I worked in the city of Stuart down in South Florida and Martin County, and we brought a lot of those guys down, to give them a break from New York. And the stories that we were told were just, that they had basically molten metal under that site for a year or more. There was just no reason. You can, if you research it, you can look it up. They did like the aerial infrareds, and you can see those the pits that they were digging in below those, and there's even pictures that it looks like the side of a volcano, because it melted the rock I mean, that's how hot those materials were, and that's nanothermite. This is what did that. I mean, you can't. And if you just watch some of the video, you see molten metal pouring out of that building before it comes down. I mean, that does not happen in a structure fire. There's not enough fuel load in an aircraft to do that to a building. Those buildings were designed to take hits from, I think it's 747.
Mhm.
But yeah, and then there's building 7, and I don't know if this will surprise you or not, but the fire service itself to this day is probably 50-50 on what actually caused that. And these are guys, I actually talked to, the guy's name's Alan Brusini, and he was the chief of Phoenix, and like a god in the fire service, building construction. I mean, I read his books, and when I took my company officer courses, and I actually talked to the guy, and he just wouldn't go there. It was like he knew that if you applied physics, that it made no sense, at least, and he just, being in the position he was in, I guess, just couldn't go there, and that pretty sad, for the fire service. But that's I'm sorry to digress, but that's kind of where I got my
Well,
start, not believing anything.
that's good. It gives background, right? And it kind of uh, sets the flavor of the whole dynamic, because there's a lot of people who spend their entire careers doing the best they can, but then they are also beholden to the system that they are involved with, and it's not easy for anyone. So I don't like to just sit there and wag my finger at people like, oh, you're the bad guy, because nothing's black and white. Nothing is. So
Yeah, and I agree there. It's just that the fire service is so dedicated, and we're into continuing education and learning more and more and more, and then it just felt weird to be a part of that, and you've got like at least half of the people that can't see what's in front of their face. Yeah, it is just a strange feeling. But I gave out as much information to whoever wanted to hear it as I could, and I think I might have changed a few minds over the years. But it's just a strange situation and we're based in science. All the medical stuff, all we do, all the hazardous materials training, the fire behavior. I mean, it's all about science, and it's just it was just a very bitter pill to swallow, where you can almost a first year firefighter that paid attention and basic standards could look at that and know that it was not collapse due to fire. So at any rate, but getting back to East Palestine, I'll be on the lookout for that, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that that's all public record, and it's really not that they're taking their time doing it, but a call of that level and the reporting that's necessary takes a long time to do. I mean, they have to account for all the chemicals that were there, all the actions that were taken. I mean, it's just a really involved. It'll probably be pages and pages and pages, I would imagine. I'd say I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 50 or 100-page report, but I will try to get my hands on that for you, and
awesome.
See if they list those chemicals, and that's what I was, and the ones that they did, even the vinyl chloride is horrible, but and also I'll just say I don't want to second guess a scene that I wasn't there. When I get the fire report, it's kind of like being there. So then I'd feel like I had a better opinion. But all I can do is tell you from my experience what we would have done in a situation like that. And the first priority is obviously life safety. So you would have been evacuating a pretty large area. We would have gone into standard hazmat operations, which anything with that we were actually in a hot zone, we would have been in level A equipment, completely encapsulated. We would have prepared, and all you can do in a situation like that is get as much water as you can on that fire, and until you cool it down. And that can be done a number of ways. And I'm, like I said, I wasn't there. I'm not sure. Maybe their water supply was a problem. But we would have gotten as much water on that and just soaked it until it went out, not allowed it to explode. That's not in our game plan. And it, like I said, and I don't know this, but if there, we wouldn't, fire service isn't even capable of doing that, because I heard a lot of reports, well, they used explosives. It's like, well, we're not capable to do that. That would be a Department of Defense function that would have to be, integrated through the command system. And I don't know of another incident in the history of the fire service where that's been done. So,
for
be real
chemicals
interest.
specifically, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure they used it
Yeah.
for blockade clearing or thing obstructions, but not for contamination.
No, to put out a, I mean, you do that with oil fires, but they're that's an accepted practice. But when you've got all these chemicals and they're mixing, and they phosgene gas was created out of some of those, and that's what happens when they combust. All these different that are highly toxic on their own, they're combining and spreading, and to allow that just to combust just seems crazy to me, and I just don't know. And then the other thing, I don't know if hopefully they were able to do that. This was your water supply on that fire. You need to be diking the water sources around that incident for any place that runoff from your firefighting activities is going to affect groundwater, and the whole thing made very little sense to me, and I guess people don't realize this either. What was kind of amazing, those trains go through just about every town every day. They usually send it at 3 or 4 in the morning, so there's nobody around if it derails. But every community in the United States, I mean, those same materials are traveling through your town, and from what I'm hearing, the maintenance is the infrastructure. Norfolk and Southern, they're all these big companies are concerned with their profits. I don't think they're too concerned with keeping the equipment up. But yeah, you're dealing with bombs or something that potentially could become a bomb, or just something that if it leaks out, can take out an awful lot of people.
Quick, fast, and in a hurry. So for those, excuse me, for those who don't know, phosgene gas was a chemical asphyxiation agent that they used in World War I. It was, I want to say it was designed by a German gentleman. They waited for the wind to be right, and then they just opened up the canisters and let it flow across.
Mustard gas, yeah. My grandfather was in the British Army and was exposed to that when he lied and said he was 18. He enlisted when he was 16. And went to the Dardanelles in Turkey. And oh my God, if you ever read about the Dardanelles, he got blown off a troop ship by a torpedo and shot twice. And then he came home and he spent the next 50 years down a coal mine in Scotland. So they don't make them like that anymore. I don't think I would have been able to do that. But
no, well, I don't want to say people are soft, but they've definitely gotten acclimated to longer lifespans, and I think people, so when my dad was coming up, it was real common to for people on the block to be missing fingers from just work accidents and things. The safety just wasn't there. OSHA was the big thing. And now OSHA is doing things like trying to mandate that people get so
yeah,
not cool. That's a
Yeah,
whole other thing.
priorities and EPA and FDA and everything else. They're just band-aids for looks, because they're basically controlled and owned by the companies that they are supposed to be regulating. So it's really not ideal. And I really feel for those people in East Palestine. I mean, and they're relying on the EPA, and the EPA just doesn't have a clue. And they said they're going to make them whole. There's no way they're going to be able to make those people whole. And I don't even think they're talking about, some sort of prevention of incidents like this in the future. And the only way you can prevent them is to make sure that all the railroad track is in tip-top condition, and all the hardware for the cars. That's the only way. I mean, if you're going to transport that stuff, and apparently we need to do it, that's your only safety factor, is to make sure your equipment is. And they might, that was a battle that we fought a lot, is just staffing and getting support for proper emergency response, and there's the rural communities in the United States just don't have the manpower or the resources necessary to handle a lot of these incidents. And if you don't, when you pull up there, you're going to have a problem. I'm not really familiar with the responding fire departments, and I need to put some more research into it. But I can, if it's a rural part of the United States, what they're pulling up with, even on a 2, 3, or 4 alarm incident, 5 alarm incident, you're probably going to be understaffed and not have everything you need to mitigate the incident right away. So
Sure.
that's a story for another day.
Well, it makes sense, right? Like a rural community isn't gonna. Well, the staff is going to be probably 95% volunteer from the gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Right.
a matter of like PPE and counter agents for who knows what kind of hazmat, So
yeah, and just manpower. I mean, if they're going, in my mind, and we thought about this a lot of times, and really never got any support from industry. If you're going to be transporting this type of material through residential areas, they need to be footing the bill for a county hazmat team that's paid by them. That because these small counties, their fire departments can't, and the volunteer fire departments can't support anything like that. But that let's just take Norfolk and Southern. They could do that if they wanted to on a pretty large basis, or at least much more than they're doing now, which is nothing. They should foot the bill. They're the ones that are transporting this death through our neighborhoods and our towns. But don't think we'll ever see that happen.
No. I'm sure that they spend more money on making sure that the legislation goes their way than they do on protection and standards of transportation equipment. But that's just speculation. Yeah, I'm on the outside looking in, and I'm admittedly a little bit on the based side against some of these larger companies that seem to not be taking care of their stuff. Talking about rail workers that are overworked and staffing issues there and safety issues, and guys, saying, well, you can file about this, equipment being done, but you might have to take a couple weeks off, or the dog whistles in that regard. Yeah,
I'm sure anybody that's bringing these glaring safety issues to their management's attention probably booted right out of there, even with the whistleblower protection. I mean, they're supposed to be, but their safety is not their first priority. Profit is. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. But
With the,
I'll get all the info. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, sorry. The the whole watershed system and how that's feeding into the Ohio and then feeding into southern states is pretty terrible as far as I can see. And I don't know the full extent of it because I haven't stayed with it, but I'm sure that there must be issues probably as far south as Tennessee by now from the
Absolutely,
flow.
absolutely. And I mean, the fish kills. I mean, what does that tell you? You know, that's right off the bat, and all of that is going into the aquifer, you know, the watershed, and it when it rains, it you know, path of least resistance. So yeah, I'm sure the contamination will spread out well beyond that area to God knows where, and I don't see the EPA doing any comprehensive reporting or follow up that people are going to know that. They just, you know, they'll do their investigation, and you know, I can't imagine it going much wider than, you know, the general area of the accident, or you know, maybe 50-mile radius or something like that, maybe.
Right.
But that'll be interesting to see too, what kind of documentation and testing that they're doing for the water and the soil. And you know, that's an agricultural area. There's, you know, have these animals already been contaminated, you know?
Yeah, the livestock issues above ground, not fish, were pretty rapid. You know, the onset of some of the phosgene and stuff. There were somebody who had a bunch of foxes, presumably for fur, and he had a bunch of die off there and people's pets and whatnot. I'm curious if you have an educated guess on how long it would take, like a large body of water like the Ohio River, to start to deposit some of its new contaminants into people's aquifers or underground water basins.
That would be really hard to say. Depending, you know, some of the factors would be rainfall, you know, snowfall, what type of you know, precipitation the area has gotten and will get. But yeah, that's really hard to say. That would, there's so many variables in that. But the immediate area, you know, like the hot and the warm zones and of that incident, that would probably be fairly quick, I would imagine. You know, just in the local waterways, and you know, of course the soil and any animals that were contaminated by that would be pretty quick.
Yeah, humans are animals too, so I'm sure we'll see some
Mhm.
unfortunate results of this thing within the next couple of years. My heart goes out to the people of East Palestine, man, and the surrounding states too, because it's not just one person's problem at this point. It's everybody's.
No, no, no. The system is broke. I don't know if you heard about this, but it's kind of a side issue. But they just released. There's a nuclear plant that had a leak of, I think it was like 14,000 gallons of tritium contaminated water in Minnesota, and they just decided not to tell anybody. and
Oh,
and now the story is, and you know, they have containment at most of those facilities, but it's coming out, I think, a month after the incident, and why on earth you just wouldn't? I think that's some kind of law that they need to, isn't it? You know, that you know, the local population should be informed when there's a spill or a leak at a nuclear plant. But
I would think, right?
apparently not in Minnesota right now.
So tritium is a radioactive isotope of helium 3, right? So um, it's what they use in a lot of night sights and firearms. It's oftentimes a gas in that situation, and it reacts with a phosphorus lining on the inside of these little glass tubes, and it causes it to
Yeah,
glow.
it's a byproduct of plutonium, I believe,
Okay.
which is, you know, pretty nasty. I'm sure it's got an outrageous half-life, and it's not something that you want going into your water system. And and they say they have containment. Maybe they do. Maybe is the containment adequate? How's that infrastructure? Are these containment ponds, being do they have the correct maintenance? Are they leaking? Do we even know?
How are they sealed? Right? I'm just gonna just
they're supposed to be,
right.
but
So
everything, if the plant was made 30 years ago, do they follow up on stuff like that? I don't know.
this conversation really does lead me to kind of question how often underreporting of situation goes on.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
I'm sure it's probably the norm, and I think it's gotten worse. From at least over my time in the fire service, I think they were much more prompt and transparent in dealing with hazardous materials incidents. That was I think that's changed a lot over and just an example like that. And then East Palestine. I mean, God, I mean, it's just it just seems like it's getting worse, not better.
yeah. The so I recall our infrastructure has been a long-standing issue. I remember I was living in Delaware at the time when maybe it was Obama on his second term was supposed to come through, and they had to shut down. What was it? Was it a bridge on 95 that ran through Wilmington because the supports had shifted, and that he was supposed to come through and inspect that and look at things, but they had to side behind him and put him on to something else for a different photo op. So it's long standing, absolutely.
Yeah, and as far as I know, I believe Trump passed an infrastructure bill, and Biden has passed one or two, trillions of dollars, and I don't know. I haven't seen any projects going on around where I live. I mean, where is that money going?
I'm not really one party or the other so much these days, but I do find it interesting that I heard a factoid, and I haven't verified it yet, but I'm going to drop it anyhow. That the amount of money Trump had spent on what he did build as far as the wall still doesn't cost as much as the Obamacare website annually. So,
and I am apolitical. I mean, I just there's no difference. Whoever's in there. I mean, it's all. I think you can, and we recently did. We did a march on Tallahassee for medical freedom in Florida, and you can actually talk to the legislators, and it looks like that's going to get passed. But and state is still you can influence your state lawmakers and local, but federal, it's just it's a big waste of time. I don't see that there's any way to change that, and I don't have any solutions for that. But yeah, I'm pretty much apolitical. We do have some good people in politics, but I think the majority of them are bought and paid for. Best government money can buy.
yeah, for sure. For sure. Who are you beholden to? Who's your biggest contributors, and follow the money, and it'll lead you to answers you don't want to find all the time.
Yeah. I'm not sure what the answer is, but they're really not doing a very good job. But I feel bad for the guys that are still in the fire service that they're having to do more with less and less, and just everything that's coming down the pike is just so awful. And they're still, and I mean, nobody in the fire service does that job, for the money. They do it because they love it, but it's getting harder and harder on the people, because I keep in touch with a lot of people that are still working, and it's they're just making, the government is making their job harder and harder. It shouldn't be the case.
Do more with less, right? All the time.
Exactly, and it was that to a certain extent when I was there, but it just seems like it's just getting progressively worse, and the threats are getting worse, and the pandemics and hurricanes, and yes, as I talked to DeSantis when I was in there. I said, well, who do you think are going to respond to these Category 5 hurricanes if you don't? The fire service has been in Florida, and probably nationwide, has been decimated by people fired and people quitting, and so hopefully there's a bill in the works that's supposed to remedy all that. And we actually read it. We met the sponsors, so, and I was actually shocked, that they were so responsive, because that just doesn't seem to be the norm in 2023 in America.
No. I mean, so we've certainly been through a few years of absolute madness, and part of it. So I remember I had my tinfoil hat on probably in 17 or 18, and I was looking at some of the suggestions that people were putting out, and one of them was utilizing mass migration, right? And then we started having all these weird fires in like California, and you'd mentioned before, and people were moving to Florida, people were moving to Texas, and something that not related at all, but people up in Maine say, the people from Philadelphia who go up there to vacation and everything, or move up there to live, it's great that they're coming up, but they're bringing Philadelphia with them. They bring the Philadelphia attitude and all that, and so which is, it is what it is. So when people are doing these mass migrations because of either like no work, or everything's catching on fire and they're trying to flee for their lives, like they tend to bring some of those personality traits in the way they vote and the way they think and the way they behave with them, and it's not always, I don't think it always meshes well, but
no. It's a good segue into talking about the fires, though.
yeah it's interesting. So John shared some pictures with me. I'm going to bring them up here for you guys to look, who are looking at YouTube here, and go. So in these pictures, whoop, okay. Yeah, sure, you always use this app, that's fine. Well, this taking too long. That's not even it. All right, we're gonna just go back to the Twitter where he sent them to me. I'll share from there. So these pictures,
I think they're still there.
Oh yeah. These guys. So what's interesting with these pictures that John shared with me is the fire in the buildings doesn't always seem to carry over into the surrounding environment. For example, these trees here surrounding this incinerated building. So I mean, you can see over here there's brick, there's some steel I-beams over here, but the parking lot is not blistered, it's not cracked up or anything over here. It looks like an archway came down, but like the trees are fine. Some of them have some burning, but you would think that when you're burning down entire buildings like this, that some of the heat would transfer over and burn the surrounding environment also.
Yeah, there's a lot of just from anything that I've known, and yeah, and in a wildfire, you have there's a lot of forces at play in it. As basic fire science, your heat's gonna transfer through conduction, which is like going through something. If you put a blowtorch on a piece of metal, it will conduct that heat through the other side, and it can set combustibles on fire, but that takes a very, very high temperature, to do that. Convection is more, the heat gets displaced or is moved by water or air. Anything that's, the heat rises, and anything cooler will push that. So that's one other way of transferring heat. And then radiation, and most brush fires, the type of heat that you're dealing with is radiated heat. And to see what you're looking at there, the green trees, the amount of heat that I would say that was radiated to set all those structures on fire. And in building, our building materials now are pretty flame resistant, fire resistant. I mean, I just can't imagine the amount of heat it would take to conduct a brush fire that was burning somewhere in that area. And I don't see a whole lot of evidence of that either. There is some burn, appears behind that. But for those trees to still be green there, and to have a temperature that's adequate to ignite, all those houses, just doesn't seem to make any sense in the fire science that I learned. It just doesn't seem possible.
So, like, being that I don't have that education in fire science here, but I do know a little bit of like World War II history. So I know that when we firebombed Tokyo, you have really large swaths of land that were absolutely ablaze. The updraft from the air and the heat was creating vacuums and fire tornadoes, right?
Yes.
But I mean, all that draw, you would think, would move a lot of the heat around either one way or the other.
Yeah, and there were fire tornadoes in those fires in California. Those were created because it was there was a tremendous amount of fuel, involved. But just looking at these pictures, it just doesn't seem to make sense. And that tree, that was a good one. That was on CNN. The tree burning from the inside.
That's pretty.
That's
wild.
Something I've never seen.
I've seen an old hollowed out tree catch fire before, but I mean, it looks like it has a lot of meat in it, as it were. You know what I mean? Like a lot of good wood to have a bed of coals that's standing, and then the outside bark is relatively okay.
Yeah, and I suppose a lightning strike could do something like that. But again, I've seen a lot of trees hit by lightning, and I've never seen something like that. Looked very odd.
Stuff.
And the thing is, and there's a pretty good documentary on YouTube about that campfire. It's called The Campfire, not a campfire. It was in California. Yeah, there we go. Aluminum melting, and you've got power lines that are intact. And
look at all those grapes; they're fine.
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
So I'm willing to go down the wild speculation rabbit hole. There is a movie in the 80s called Real Genius, and it had Val Kilmer in it. And the premise of the movie was that they were using Ivy League students essentially to develop aerial laser weapons for incineration from high altitude. And it really does kind of look like something that this
directed energy weapons. Yeah. And they do exist.
It's pinpoint, it's just pinpoint. It's just around here. You can see that the road's all jacked up, and then a couple feet away the road's fine. So I don't know, folks. I don't have the answers, but more questions.
Yeah, there's nothing close enough to that car that would melt aluminum. if that was raging, That's another, yeah.
Strange stuff. So the directed energy stuff is absolutely for real, but I don't know if they're using microwaves or laser, which is really tight light. I'm not well versed enough in that, but I would suspect that microwave would make sense because I know that they use it in area deterrence technology for the Army. You see a Humvee with a big old satellite dish on the back on top of it. Chances are that's for area deterrence. We use microwaves to make people really uncomfortable. The Air Force had what they called the pain ray to target agitators in these crowds. Boy, that would have been a handy tool to use in the agitators of the January 6th movement. But gosh, it's just shame it wasn't there.
But yeah, all these, like I said, you're in a brush fire situation. If something like this has happened, unless every one of these houses had wood shake shingles on the roof, which I doubt because they really kind of don't use those anymore, and I don't think you can get insurance if you have them. But flying embers, setting a wood roof on fire, might do something like that. But just and lot after lot, it just, the precision just doesn't make any sense to me. And for the radiant heat, like that last picture with the house with the swimming pool, what was burning and radiating at a temperature that would turn that, basically into a pile of ash? And we've got the green trees, that are right on their circular driveway there, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Just
I wonder if they ran
sense.
and duck into this little tunnel over here, culvert. No idea. Might be handy to have. See, it's scary because this stuff could be flying over us all the time and we wouldn't have a clue.
I'm sure it is. I have no doubt.
Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff flying around up there and in space that we have no idea of the capability of it.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, but I unfortunately have a curious mind, so here we are.
Yeah, me too. A lot of the stuff that I know, I'd rather not know.
Yeah, but it's scary at first, but eventually you kind of settle with it, and you're like, well, this is the world that we live in. Just like you're saying with these chemicals and these trains are moving through communities all across the country all the time and at variable hours, and if you want to duck your head in the sand, that's fine. But maybe nothing will happen. Maybe it will. But I'm someone who'd rather know than not.
Yeah, and me too. But it's burdensome. Some of this knowledge is really, it's spiritually rough to carry around. When you're worried about your family and your kids and their grandkids and your grandkids and everybody else's. It's just hard to believe we've gotten to where we're at. But
well, hopefully through a lot of open dialogues and honest exchanges, we'll be able to walk our way back towards having some semblance of civility between us and the elements that manufacture things for groups.
Well, I hope so. You have to have some hope to go on day to day. So yeah, and there's a lot. The well-meaning and good people far outnumber, I think, some of the ones that are perpetrating, some of this mayhem on us. So
I agree.
Strength in numbers.
Yeah, not everybody in the CIA is bad. Not everybody in the FBI is bad. A lot of people go in with the absolute best intentions. Like when I joined the Army, I wasn't thinking like, yeah, let me go be a stormtrooper for Iraq. I was thinking of trying to serve my country. So,
Absolutely.
Once you learn that your patriotism is sometimes co-opted, then you take a step back and be a little bit more analytical about things. And that's about all I can hope anybody does.
Yeah, I got a nephew just graduated airborne.
All right. Well,
Jumping out of perfectly good airplane.
yeah.
He said, "Well,
Nice.
you ran into burning buildings, so what the hell's the difference?"
Fair's fair. Yeah, man. John, tell everybody where they can find you.
Um, on Twitter, at Fireman John 629. Everybody's like, what is that handle? That's my email address. That was and my number at the fire department was 628. And before I got banned on Twitter, it was Fireman John 628. So I I got reborn on Twitter. So now it's 629. But that was my first email address when we got email at the fire department. And I was like, well, I gotta have something that I can remember, So I had my ID number that was your 628, and I was a fireman, and my name was John, so that became my email address, and it still is. I'm on Yahoo, Fireman John 628 at yahoo.com. And but that was my first email address, and that's what that handle's about, because people are like, what is all that? It's just the ways that I could remember email addresses when they first how old I am. So we had to
It's
have one.
it's wild that I find myself starting to be surprised at how younger people don't understand some of the technology that we came up with like days before email, when in order to check your email you went through dial-up, and that's just the way it was.
Hmm.
Those days are gone. But
America Online. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me on. If I can ever be any help, just holler. I'm on Twitter, raising as much hell as I can. And thank you for the work you're doing, because that communication and education is that's what we need to be doing.
awesome, John. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it. Hope everybody has enjoyed this conversation. I know I have. I know your time's valuable, but so thanks for spending it with us. Have a great night.